What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Katson's Corner, the show where we talk about college football from a Chargers and NFL draft perspective. We are back for another week to talk about some early risers in this 2025 NFL draft class. We're going to talk about some guys that have been playing super well about midway through the college football season here. Going to cover a few different positions. We're going to go from all the way from running back to safety. Before we do that, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff as normal. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you have the notification bell on so that when Steven, Tyler, other Alex go live, post videos, do all that stuff, you get notifications. You guys know when those are coming up. Make sure you guys know when Katson's Corner is coming out. We're sort of varying days a little bit this year just because of my schedule. So I do apologize if you're looking for a little bit more consistency. I am doing my best. Um, it's been sort of a busy season for me. If you want to keep track of all the stuff that I'm doing, you can go over to X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and find me at Alex Katson, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. I'm going to be on the radio for the first time this week. When you guys see this, I will be on the radio this afternoon to talk about the UW Iowa game in Cedar Rapids. And then I will also be on the radio on Friday to talk about Chargers Broncos in Grand Junction, Colorado. I posted a tweet about that a couple days ago, hoping that there is a way for you guys to listen if you are not in those specific areas that I will notify people of when I get that information. But very excited about that. Very excited to be back for another episode, and we are going to get into it. So the first guy I want to talk about is someone who, as I just mentioned, I'm covering the UW Iowa game this week. And so he is someone that has been particularly salient for me this week as I sort of write about how the Huskies are going to contain this guy. And that's Kaleb Johnson, the running back from Iowa. Has kind of burst on the scene this season, is second in the country in rushing with 771 yards, tied for third in the country in touchdowns with 10. Did have a really stellar freshman season 2 years ago, but was hurt last year and so kind of fell out of the favor, if you want to call it that, in terms of running backs in this very strong draft class. That's the way that this class sort of goes. If you have one bad game, if you're banged up for a game or two, if you are kind of struggling to get going, as we've seen from a couple of guys that we thought were going to be top guys in this class, it's really easy to sort of get lost in the shuffle because there's so many good running backs in this class. I will point out Kaleb Johnson is second in rushing in the country. I bet that you can guess who first place is if you've been watching college football at all this season. Of course, that's Ashton Genty from Boise State, who I didn't include here because I had him RB1 going into the season. I still have him RB1 now. So, not really a riser per se, more so a riser in the sense of like he might go from the late first round to the mid first round now. But Johnson is starting to gain a little bit of steam as running back 2 in this class, which if you think about some of the other names that are here, obviously you have Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State. Jaden Ott at Cal has been a popular one. Omarion Hampton at North Carolina. Ollie Gordon was a Heisman finalist last year at Oklahoma State. Like there's a lot of guys in here that we thought were going to be in the mix for RB2. And before the season, nobody was mentioning Johnson in those conversations. And the way that he has developed as a inside zone runner for Iowa, they run a lot of zone scheme at Iowa. It's a lot of inside zone. They'll mix in outside zone, wide zone every now and then to kind of give teams a different look. Iowa sort of modernized the offense a little bit this year, added a little bit more RPO game and stuff like that. But that's really helped Johnson develop as a back, and he's really developing into a complete back. When I've talked to Jed Fish and Steve Belichick, the head coach and the defensive coordinator of Washington this week in preparation for this game, Steve Belichick has called Kaleb Johnson maybe the best skill position player that UW has played all season, and that includes Kyle Monungai at Rutgers, who they just played 2 weeks ago. That includes all the guys that they just played at Michigan last week, Kalal Mullings, Donovan Edwards, all of those guys. And Jed Fish has said everything that you want in a running back, this is it. And so he's someone that NFL people are starting to kind of poke around, and I'm starting to hear more and more and more that he is in the conversation for RB2. And so if you're someone that has a hard line stance against, I don't want to draft a running back in the first round. I don't want to draft a running back as high as Ashton Genty is going to go. I don't want to do the Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley experience in 2024 and draft a running back with a top 10 pick, which I know that there's going to be some of you out there. I don't personally agree with you. That's okay. I get it. I understand where you're coming from. I know a lot of people that do feel that way, and I totally understand why. In terms of career value and, long-term sort of opportunity, I totally understand why you maybe would not want to take a running back that high. So if you don't, Johnson is sort of the next best option of like he might sneak into the late first at this point, but he might be like a high second rounder. Think about where like Brees Hall and Kenneth Walker and guys like that have gone. He fits the Chargers identity really well in terms of like he's a really strong inside runner. He is patient, he waits for blocks to develop, and then he's decisive when he finds that hole. No matter how small that hole is, he finds that hole and he hits it. He does tend to bounce runs a little bit outside every now and then, but you can sort of see in real time that he's developing a little bit more discipline with that as Iowa has relied on him more and more and more this season. There is going to be a little bit of a work in progress aspect in pass protection, but for the Chargers, who have gotten pretty good production out of J.K. Dobbins so far this season, who's a pretty decent pass blocker, I think that you can sort of mitigate that, at least as a rookie, if you want to add another back to that room. Obviously, Gus Edwards has struggled a little bit to start the year. Dobbins' long-term health is always going to be a concern just with the injury history. We haven't seen Kamani Vidal yet this season. Hassan Haskins has been sort of a non-factor outside of special teams. So if you want to add another back, which it seems like is a popular sort of thing for the Chargers right now, I think Johnson is a really good one and someone that is really, really, really rising up boards. Like I said, before the season, we were not talking about this guy as a top 10 running back in the class just because of how loaded it seemed. And now all of a sudden we're talking about him as RB2 just because of the season that he's had so far. Moving to wide receiver, we're going to talk about Tai Felton from Maryland. So staying in the Big Ten here, about 65% on the outside, 35% in the slot. He's about 6'2, 186, I believe it is. He's almost at 4 yards per route run, which is fourth in college football among receivers with 25 or more targets this season. Kind of gives you an idea of just how insane college football can be sometimes. Of like, if you're dominant, you're truly dominant. 4 yards per route run is an insane number. And Felton has really driven this Maryland offense down the field. He is their downfield threat. He's kind of their speedster. He's the guy that is going to stretch the field. And so if you look at the Chargers offense, they don't necessarily have that guy right now. They have Lad McConkey sort of underneath. They have Quentin Johnston, who they're trying to get a little bit of downfield looks for. We've seen through the first 4 games of this season, but they're also trying to get him a lot of looks underneath and get him going as a yak receiver. Felton, I think, fits that profile pretty well as well. About half of his yards this season have come on yak. I think it's about 337 of his 635 yards have come after the catch this season. He's a really strong route runner. I really like his routes. I really like his release packages. He's really developed in that area. It is a little bit more of a limited route tree just because of the way that Maryland's offense is. That's going to be true for most college offenses transitioning to the NFL. And so there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, excuse me, there. But the way that he runs the routes that he does run right now, I think is translatable. And I think that that's the sort of the thing that separates him from a guy like maybe Jalen Hyatt that we saw a couple years ago, where it was like he's running his one or two routes well, theoretically, but his one or two routes are I'm going to run past you because I'm super fast and you're going to be selling insurance in a couple of years. And now he's in the NFL. And obviously the Giants haven't been a great situation for him. He's gotten open a little bit, but there's been an adjustment period with him, right? Of there's not as much opportunity to just blow by a guy in the NFL. So I think that that part of Felton's game is going to be huge for him in terms of the release packages and the route versatility, the route package that he has, I think is really translatable. I think is really going to appeal to NFL teams. He's another guy that we weren't really talking about before the season, and I think he's starting to sort of creep up into the second round conversation. Maybe he sticks towards the end of the second, early third. It's going to probably depend on testing a little bit. Has not dropped a pass yet in 2024. Again, he has more than 25 targets on the season through 6 games. I think he's closer to 50. He's Maryland's leading receiver. He has not dropped a pass all year. The concern with him is going to be that it is a 1 year sample size. He's on track to smash every career high he's ever had at Maryland. This is not someone that was necessarily stuck behind NFL caliber receivers at Maryland last season or the season before. And so it's just sort of a development curve thing with him, not necessarily like it's not like a guy at like Alabama or Georgia or one of these power programs or Ohio State, right? Where it's just like, okay, well, he didn't produce last year because they had 8 NFL guys on the team, and he just had to wait his turn. Maryland hasn't really had those guys. They've had a couple of guys that went UDFA the last couple of years, but no one that really is like, "Oh, I see why Felton hasn't been productive his first couple of years in college." So there's gonna be some questions about that he's gonna have to answer. And then just because of how slight his frame is, again, I think he's only 186 at 6'2". Not a great blocker as it stands right now. So maybe not necessarily someone that the Chargers see as a fit necessarily, but also they have receivers like Darius Davis on the team, who obviously is a little bit more of a return guy than a receiver, and they'll bring him in for sort of specialized packages. I think that there is probably a path towards Felton playing for this Chargers team if you are really concerned about the downfield stretching ability that the Chargers currently have at wide receiver. I think that Felton makes a lot of sense for that. It does sort of pigeonhole you into a role in terms of like when he's on the field, that's what you're going to be doing. And so NFL teams are going to be able to key in on that a little bit. But that's an okay thing to do as a rookie. We've seen the Chiefs do that a little bit with Xavier Worthy. We've seen other teams do this before. And as those guys develop, you can kind of give them a little bit more complexity. And because, again, of how strong Felton is as a route runner, how strong he is off the line as a releaser, I think that he has a path towards becoming a more productive receiver than that. But if you're looking for that element right away, I think that he makes a lot of sense for the Chargers. Going to move to the defensive side of the ball here for Oregon defensive tackle Derek Harmon. He transferred in from Michigan State this offseason and has immediately become Oregon's best defensive tackle, which is an impressive feat for a Big Ten team that has gotten this much talent out of the portal, has recruited this well. Like, that's a big deal for them. He's sort of taken over the role vacated by Brandon Dorlus a year ago a little bit. Super athletic guy. You can see that immediately in how quick he is off the snap. He leads Oregon in pressures. He's got 25 on the season, which I think is fourth in the country. In addition to leading the team, they've got a big matchup this Saturday. We won't talk about all the games that are happening this week, but it's a really good slate of college football. If you guys are interested, if you're going to be free on Saturday, want to turn some games on, there's a lot of ranked matchups going on. But Oregon, number 3 in the country, is playing Ohio State, number 2. So it's going to be a big matchup for him. Ohio State's line has played pretty well to start the season, but they are weak in a couple of points. And so it could be a really big game for Harmon on a national stage. He's familiar with this Ohio State team. Again, he transferred in from Michigan State, so he's seen them every year, every other year that he's been in college. Is a versatile player along the defensive line. I think you can kind of move him all over. He's probably going to sit best at like a 3 to 5 tech, sort of in the same sort of vein as a Scott Matlock, a Otito Ogbonnia has for the Chargers. And then I think that there's some improvements that he can make from a technique standpoint. I think his hands can use a little bit of work. His block shedding is not necessarily always the best, especially in run defense. But in this class, there are not that many ready-made plug-and-play starters at any position, let alone defensive tackle. There are a few, obviously. There's Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant at Michigan. I like Dion Walker at Kentucky a lot. There are a few, right, that will be able to come in and play right away. But after that, there aren't a lot, and that's sort of emblematic of the way that the rest of this draft class is. And so what happens when you have that is that you have a bunch of guys that might turn into something down the line. And when that's what you have, you are going to bet on traits 10 out of 10 times, all other things being equal. And Harmon has the traits. Brugler mentioned him as a guy that might be rising into the late first round based on the way that he's played so far to start this season. Again, I sort of want to see what he does against Ohio State this weekend. I think Oregon's level of competition has not necessarily been the highest so far. Obviously, just now getting into Big Ten play, they played a Boise State team. Ashton Genty did pretty well against them. They struggled with Idaho. They've not really gotten up to this level, right, of this Ohio State level program. And so this is going to be a really big test for him, really big test for the rest of the roster. Really excited to see how that one goes. And if Harmon continues playing this way, I think that there's definitely a reasonable case to be made that he will be a first round pick in April. Moving over to the edge, we're going to talk about LT Overton from Alabama. Transferred in from Texas A&M this season. He's a true junior. He's 283 pounds, and you would never be able to tell. He moves like he's 250, maybe even less than that, like 245, 250. It's insane the way that he moves at 283. And so because of that, you can totally just stick him on the edge and have him play base end. You can even have him play stand up outside linebacker the way that the Chargers have their edge rushers play, and you can plug and play him immediately. He can do that and do it well right from the jump. But he can also, if you're going to bring in that NASCAR package with three edge rushers, or you're going to change up the look a little bit, right? He can come in and he can play that interior pass rusher role. He can be the guy that moves inside like Tuli Tuipulotu has for the Chargers so far this season, and be the guy that is rushing from five tech, because he's 283 pounds. He has the stoutness to hold up in that sort of area. Leads Alabama's in pressures this season with 16. It's kind of been a breakout season for him. Was a pretty highly rated recruit, but Texas A&M had a lot of those guys in the D line that were pretty good recruits, but maybe necessarily didn't produce quite as much as they maybe should have, just based on the way that they were coached and sort of the way that everything went there. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher got fired last offseason, and so kind of uh, illustrates to you that maybe the coaching was not the best. But now that he's moved over to Alabama, he's really blossomed as a player. Has missed 4 tackles in 2024. It's a missed tackle rate of, I think it's 25% right now. So not what you love to see from a guy, especially if you're going to think about moving him into the interior a little bit. But I think that that's probably a sample size thing. Obviously, they've played Georgia this season. They've sort of struggled a little bit to get going. I think that that's something that as the season goes on, I'm going to monitor. I'm not super concerned about it with him because I think that he has the functional strength and the technique and everything to make tackles. Sometimes you just play players that are better than you, especially when you're in the SEC and you're playing these high level programs week in and week out. He is going to be a younger prospect too, which is a huge aspect for the Chargers specifically in terms of long-term thinking. Graduated high school a year early to reclassify and come to Texas A&M in 2022. So he's probably only 20 years old right now because he's a true junior. Might have turned 21 by now, but he will probably be a 20, 21-year-old rookie, which if you think about the long-term pairing between him and Tuli Pelotu, Joey Bosa's gotten banged up again this season. How many more years are you going to be able to get out of Khalil Mack, even though he's playing at a pretty decently high level still? The Chargers need to be thinking about the future at that position. Your fourth edge rusher is Bud Dupree, who's a veteran, not someone who is going to be a long-term answer for you. And so if you're thinking about who is going to be the long-term guy next to Tui Pelotu, Overton sort of fits as this guy is super young. We're going to be able to develop him into exactly the player that we want him to be. We're going to be able to do all sorts of stuff with him. Minter's going to be able to move him around the formation. And I think that it's someone that would make a lot of sense for the Chargers. He's someone I've seen got mocked to the Chargers quite a bit as things have sort of picked up the last couple of weeks. I think that he makes a lot of sense kind of towards the end of the first round if the Chargers pick slides down a little bit from where it is right now in the first round. Staying on the edge, we're going to talk about Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College. This might be my favorite player in the draft class. He has been fantastic for Boston College this season. He is tied for the most pressures in the country with 26. He had 14 tackles as an edge rusher at 250 pounds against Western Kentucky. And I know what you're going to say. Oh, Western Kentucky, it's not a super high level of competition. Boston College is not a good ACC program. Let's be clear about that. Also, as an aside, 14 tackles as an edge rusher, no matter who you're playing. I don't care if you're playing a D3 school as a Power 5 school. That is an insane number to have as an edge rusher. And that development as a tackler is going to be something that teams are going to pick up on with him, because coming into this season, Ezeraku's knock is that he wasn't a great run defender. He needed to continue to sort of show development in that area. Well, if you hold up against the run and you produce 14 tackles, some of those were against a scrambling quarterback that Western Kentucky trotted out there. He did have 3 sacks of that quarterback as well in that game. He's had 2 sacks of Florida State. He had 2 sacks in another game the week before Western Kentucky. I can't remember who the opponent was off the top of my head right now, but he has been on fire to start the season through the first half. Again, that development as a run defender, Boston College is letting him stay isolated as the read defender on read option and trusting him to get off a block and make the correct read and make the correct play. That sort of development and that sort of confidence that they have in him. Remember that Boston College's head coach is Bill O'Brien. He's an NFL guy. He wouldn't do that if he didn't think that Ezeraku was capable of doing it. And so that development is going to be huge for him. He's a super bendy edge rusher around the corner. I think that he wins a little bit more with athleticism than technique right now. That's okay because of how bendy he is and how reliable that is for him right now. But I think when you get to the NFL, there is going to be maybe a little bit of an adjustment. We see every year that these guys sort of hit a rookie wall, maybe midway through their first season, where suddenly things start to get a lot harder. The pressures are not coming the same way that they used to. It's a lot of cleanup duty if you're getting anything at all. And that's just a technique thing. And again, if you're talking about bringing him in, maybe it's the year before, right? Back Bosa and Mac, excuse me, are sort of on their way out, right? They restructured those contracts. It seems like both of them are going to be back for 2025, health permitting. And so if you bring in Ezeraku as the fourth edge rusher, third, fourth, however you want to tier it, that gives him a little bit more time to come in as a designated pass rusher the way that Bud Dupree has this season, get a little bit of get more reps as a rookie, get his feet wet a little bit in the NFL, allow him to sort of develop behind the scenes, get mentored by these guys, and then when it comes time, you have a succession plan already in place rather than having to draft the replacement for Bosa or for Mac when they exit the team in 2026 or 2027 or wherever it may be, where you have to draft a guy and immediately ask him to play 80, 90% of the snaps as a rookie. If you draft Ezeraku, who I think is rising up into sort of the second round range. And so, again, if you want to address a more pressing need in the first round, you want to take a running back, you want to take a wide receiver, you want a weapon for Justin Herbert, you want an offensive lineman, whether that's a guard or if a center rises up to the first round pick that the Chargers have. You want to address corner, maybe. Like if you want to address a different need, right? Because edge is not as pressing of a need. It's not something where he's going to be a contributing player in 2025, like I talked about. I think Ezeraku makes a lot of sense. He's a second round guy. He's a fireball off the edge. He's going to add value as a DPR immediately, and you can sort of coach him up, maybe add a little bit more bulk to him, and bring that run defense out of him. And I think that he's someone that's going to develop into a really, really good NFL player based on the first 6 weeks of this season. Moving to the secondary, quarterback Monsour Delan for Virginia Tech has kind of gotten overshadowed by his teammate here at Virginia Tech. Dorian Strong has been on NFL radars for a little while, but I honestly think that I like Delane better. He's been playing really well to start the season through these first 6 games. Super aggressive in press coverage. Is a little bit slighter. Again, he's about 6'2", maybe 185, 187-ish, sub 200 pounds. For a corner, you probably want that to get up to right around 200 by the time he hits the NFL. It's sort of the same for quarterback. We had this discussion with Bryce Young when he came out and everything of like 200 pounds is sort of the line that you want him to get to. I think for corner, it's the same thing. Delane has experience at safety in the box. He sort of moved around a little bit. That's going to be something that is going to be, I think, a key aspect of evaluating defensive backs in the current Chargers defensive scheme with Jesse Minter as coordinator. You want versatility. They're going to want guys that can move around the formation, guys who will be able to add to the disguise that the Chargers are putting before the snap, because they're running the Chargers are running mostly the same 3 or 4 coverages through the first 4 games of this season. You're sort of getting a sense of what Minter wants to major in as far as a coverage defense. But the disguises on those coverages, the way that you set those up, the way that you rotate into a cover 2 look or rotate into a cover 4 look, that is the difference between a good defense and a great defense once you sort of establish what you want to major in terms of coverage. And so I think the versatility as a defensive back is really going to help with that. Delane has some of that. He can drift back to safety. He can come up and play in the box. He can move around a little bit. He's a super quick diagnostic player as a route reader. He is so fast to figure out what the route is and break on it from both man and zone. Really strong tackler despite being so slight, which I know Chargers fans for a corner is going to be a big, big deal for them with the way that Asante Samuel's played to start the year. But rest assured, even though I said, he's only 187 pounds or whatever, he's a great tackler, at least so far through the first 6 games here. There is a little bit of deep zone technique that I think he could clean up a little bit when he's in bail. Virginia Tech runs a decent amount of cover 3. And so when he's in bail technique and Delan is sort of drifting back to get into that deep zone, he's susceptible to turning all the way around where he's facing the wrong way when the quarterback is dropping back. He's sort of running parallel with the quarterback. And so he can sort of lose receivers sometimes when he gets into that back pedal, when he turns back around, because he's not looking at what's in front of him. He's running towards the end zone that he's defending. And so I think there's a little bit of cleanup there. Obviously, it's a nitpicky thing with him. I think that he's sort of someone that I'm interested in like the 3rd or 4th round range. But again, a riser in the sense that like we weren't really talking about him at all to start the year. I don't think that many people were talking about him outside of like a day 3 flyer maybe, but he's played really well to start the year. I think he's working himself into that day 2 conversation. I think he'll be at an all-star game this winter. And so that sort of increased exposure to this high level of competition, I think will really do wonders for him. And then to close out here, we've got safety Kamari Ramsey at USC, transferred in from UCLA with defensive coordinator D'Anton Lynn this offseason. If you guys are Southern California guys, you probably know about this. D'Anton Lynn is the son of former Chargers coach Anthony Lynn, has really transformed that USC defense this season. Ramsey has been a big reason why. I think he's the most physical and most physically gifted safety USC has had in a long time. And that's an impressive feat considering that they just had Kalen Bullock drafted in, I think, the 3rd round maybe it was the 2nd round even, this past April. But Ramsey has been phenomenal to start the first 6 games of the season. He can line up anywhere. Mostly he's going to play in the deep half. He has played in the box. He's played in the slot, about 100 snaps each. Again, something to sort of monitor with the Minter defense of, can this guy move around? Can we sort of deploy this guy in a variety of different roles to disguise what we're running on coverage? Super rangy, super fluid. Again, good tackler from that safety spot. Going to be a big deal for the Chargers. I think that's going to be a big point of emphasis for them. He's forced 2 fumbles this season. I think that in coverage, he does tend to get a little bit gullible. I think that quarterbacks that are a little bit more advanced have been able to look him off pretty well to start the season, but that's to be expected because Ramsey is only a redshirt sophomore. This is only his 3rd year of college. He didn't play a full set of games as a freshman in 2022, and so he may be a player that doesn't even come out this season. This may be a 2026 guy, and if we wait until 2026, I think that obviously there's so much still yet to be determined with that class, but I think that there is a fairly good shot that he slots in as safety 2, safety 3. Caleb Downs is going to be draft eligible in 2026. Keon Sabb is another one that I really like at Alabama, but he's going to be up there. Like if he comes back in 2026, it's going to be a really strong safety class, and I think that bodes well for the Chargers because of sort of the timeline that both Alohi Gilman and Derwin James are on. And so if he does come back for that, I think that makes a lot of sense. If he does come out in 2025, I think he's going to be up there as well. Again, is going to sort of be pushed up draft boards because of the youth. Because again, as a redshirt sophomore, you're only going to be 20, 21 years old coming out of the draft. And so I think that he's another one that makes a lot of sense. He's in the Chargers' backyard. They've certainly gotten a lot of viewing opportunity on him. And again, has sort of been part of this renaissance of the USC defense, the same way that Jesse Minter and all of these staff and all of these new players for the Chargers have sort of been part of a renaissance for the Chargers defense. And so it sort of fits culturally, if you want to use that word, in that way as well. That's going to do it for this week, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. That was 7 risers, at least from my perspective, in the NFL draft so far this season, based on the first 6 weeks of college football. We will be back next week for another episode. Let me know who have caught your guys' eyes through the first 6 weeks of the college football season, who you guys sort of think are rising up draft boards. I'll take a look at them. Maybe I've already done some work on them. If not, I will, and I'll get back to you. Sound off in the comments, sound off on Twitter. Again, you can find me at Alex Katson, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. And we will see you next week. Bolt up.